A story that I've heard before, and that I know people in your life like to make a really big deal out of it because it's kind of funny, is the story about what happened right when you left the monastery. And I know that it's a kind of humorous story, but I feel like there has to be some sort of significance to it. And people play around with that story so much as if they know the meaning of it. And so is there something that you'd like to, I don't know, maybe tell the story and then describe what that actually symbolized for you?
Well, that's an incident or an occasion in my life that people like to think about. Many people knew what had happened, and so they want more information on it because it's salacious to some degree, and kind of interesting. But I had been in the monastery for 8 years and doing retreats for many people, from all the way from early adolescent children to adults. Many of the retreatants that came along to have weekend retreats were nurses from Chicago, especially from Chicago schools of nursing. So there were many young girls, and in those days there weren't really males in nursing. It was mostly women. Many young girls who were coming to the monastery and receiving lectures and guided meditations and things like that, and I was doing it. And so it just happened that many of them would write to me, even though they would leave the retreat and go back to their lives in their school. Some of them kept correspondence, and since I was in a position to do correspondence with people, especially boys who were wanting to enter the monastery, I had correspondence with girls as well. Monastics are warned about that because the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience require that you remain celibate, completely celibate, as well as not having ownership of anything and obeying a teacher, a master. So when I left the monastery, there were people that knew about it outside the monastery, and one of them happened to be a girl who wrote me back and said, I'll pick you up and take you wherever you want to go. When you leave the monastery, I'll be there.
What made you agree to that?
I didn't have any car. I didn't have any money. And it was an easy thing for me to say, great, that would be great. You could take me home to my family so I can get a platform and then launch into another job. You can do that. If you're asking that there was any suspicion in my head that more could happen, yes, there was. But I dismissed that like a good monk. And then she met me, and before we left the monastery, we had an encounter, shall we call it?
Yeah, that's fine. I think people know what that means.
Yes, and eventually she got me home, and then a relationship began, which lasted for some time.
Did you feel guilty about that happening, like as you were leaving the monastery, or could you see through why it didn't matter?
No, I already had applied for and received a dispensation from my vows. You understand, in the Catholic monastic tradition, those vows are made to the supreme priest, which is the Pope in the Catholic Church. And so those vows must be dispensed by the Pope. And so there is a waiting period. And so when I applied for dispensation, it took a couple of months for that to turn around and come to me from Rome.
I did not know that. So I guess what I'm saying is, what did that encounter symbolize for you? Because it is very dramatic, I guess. The day you leave, you're like back in the real world. And I know that it's a funny story and all, but is there any type of symbolism in that, or a deeper meaning?
I think probably it represents a dramatic and energetic return to the world that had bothered me and caused me to be suspicious of my own motives. I was worried that I would not do the things that I had come to love to do, that I'd planned to do the rest of my life, monastery or not. I was worried that I would be distracted by these kinds of things.
Yeah, were relationships with women a vice that you knew you were going to have to deal with?
I didn't see them as a vice. I saw them as a challenge that I would have to deal with, yes, and I kind of knew that. I knew that would happen. It wasn't lost on me that women who were coming to retreats were extremely interested, even though they knew I was a seminarian, were still interested in engaging me in ways that represented their interest in more than just spirituality.
What I'm getting from what you're saying is that it symbolized like an immediate, here's the real world, you're gonna have to deal with this type of thing.
That was my way in the monastery, even before I left, is take it on. Take on the flaws, the small flaws that I had, small resentments I had over when I played sports, a soccer ball that was taken away from me, and a play I didn't get to make. They were small, let's call them irritations, rather than real flaws, because I learned in the monastery not to hang on to those negative energies, to dismiss them quickly. But they're there for all of us. If a fly lands on your face, you brush it away very quickly without thinking about it. So those inclinations, those proclivities, are there for all of us. To bring them under control, it takes time and energy and attention. So I knew that I'd have to deal in this way with women as well, because I had no experience with women, really.
So getting out of the monastery and being free of your priesthood, did you have marriage in mind or some sort of relationship like that?
Not at all. I didn't go that far. It was an energetic leap into the world, and let's face whatever is there. The first thing is I need work. And so I went and applied at several places, police department, construction, postal work. I applied in many places, and I got jobs everywhere.
When you were in the monastery, were you ever kind of sad that you didn't have affection? And I don't mean like any type of serious relationship, but you don't have anybody there.
Intimacy.
Yeah.
Affection. No, not at all, because I was getting it all from the spiritual energy that is generated when you turn your full attention to something good. As you would turn your attention to the warmth if you're cold, or the food if you're hungry, turn your attention fully to it. How awful to be eating some really good food and enjoying it and be disturbed over and over by it. So, in this way, I left everything as an opportunity. And I knew, for one thing, I wanted to do something meaningful. I couldn't leave the monastery and then take a job as a construction worker or take a job as a businessman, or I needed to do something meaningful. And that would mean that I'd have to do something that contributed to society and my own growth, and that I would, at the same time, continue school.